Hey guys, I wanted to tell you that this is an awesome episode, really terrific episode. I'm thrilled to. This is long overdue. I should have done this episode a long time ago. It's been a whirlwind over here, and I lining up exactly who I want on what topics. There's a lot that goes into this. So Joanne, for example, her and I, we went back and forth for a couple months trying to schedule this. I was so happy she was able to make time for me, hoping to get her back on. But I might reach out to some other folks as well, considering she's so busy, and also just to hear other perspectives, to continue this conversation, because by the end of it, I had so much. I mean, I'm thrilled about this episode, but I wanted to bring that up because if you want to leave any comments in YouTube, even if you're just listening to this, just because it's an easy way for me to keep track of things. If you go on to the YouTube and channel and find this episode and leave a comment there on any given episode, because I see those, and then I can kind of track follow-up questions a little easier. So sometimes people write me on Instagram or something. Patreon's a pretty good way. I can attend to that a little easier and have that a little more organized. But direct message on social media, I'm not telling you not to send them. I just like, I get swamped and overwhelmed with them a little bit sometimes, and so you're welcome to send them, but I'm not always able to get back to those. So yeah, hoping to have more of these conversations in the future. I hope you enjoy it, and boy, yeah. It's a good one. Enjoy.
Are we?
Yes.
Where are we?
Here.
Why are we here? Not entirely clear. We are misfits thrust into existence by random chance, with no hints at all as to how we're supposed to make sense of it all. It's immensely bizarre. Here we are.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Here We Are podcast. This is going to be a very special episode, guys. I don't want to build this up too much, but you guys as listeners, you know that I've had a little bit of a, turbulent year going back and forth with the conspiracy crowd and everything. I've mentioned it many times on the show. I haven't had any researchers on talking about this, but like I've kind of mentioned in the past, you have a science podcast, and you go, oh, while I'm touring around, it'll be fun to randomly look up different subjects at the various universities that I go to, and oh, neat, this person researches this and that about the brain, and I go in and I find out what they do, and it's this lovely little journey that I've gotten to go on this kind of so we have a nice size audience, but relatively obscure podcasts. Not used to anyone ever making some fuss about any subject that I've ever had on. Then all of a sudden, COVID happens, a global pandemic happens, and science, which is usually kind of operating on the background of most people's lives, all of a sudden confronts people, and there's a lot of reality that people are hit with, and things got super political, and what do you know? All of a sudden, when you're confronted with this inconvenient issue, now people take a lot of interest all of a sudden. And so I have, if I had a researcher on talking about COVID, or someone talking about vaccines or whatever, the first time in the 7 years I've been doing the podcast, now I got to deal with all these insane people coming out of the woodwork and yelling at me and everything else. And so it's been interesting, and it's been quite an adventure. And I haven't had anyone actually on the show to talk about kind of conspiracies and where they're coming from. So I'm super excited to welcome today. Joanne Miller is joining me. Thank you, Joanne, for joining me. And
Thanks for having me.
could you kind of introduce yourself, your background, what you do?
Sure. So I'm a professor in the Political Science and International Relations Department, and also the Psychological and Brain Sciences Department at the University of Delaware. I've been at Delaware since 2019. Before that, I was at the University of Minnesota in the Political Science and Psychology departments for about 17 years, and got my PhD at the Ohio State University in social psychology.
Nice. So what kind of stuff do you generally work on?
So a couple things. So I work on research on why people become politically active, media effects on people's political attitudes, what causes some people to be interested in politics and other people not to be interested in politics. And then, of course, conspiracy theories, why people believe conspiracy theories. I have this intersection of my work that's a combination of political science and psychology, this interdisciplinary field of political psychology. So all of the work that I do sort of asks questions about politics, but uses psychology to help us understand political attitudes and behavior.
Interesting. Well, one, let's start with why is it that some people get really politically charged and others don't? And I imagine this can change too for a lot of individuals. I know personally I've gone up and down with it. Certainly when I was younger, I wasn't political at all. And then I went through a phase when I was getting really political about 10 years ago or so. That lasted for like a year before I was like, yeah, I don't really like this. And that gave way to my my really going like fully vested into really exploring science quite a bit more at that time, because I knew I wanted to be doing something more meaningful and exploring the nature of life and reality. And I just didn't think politics was really, not that I don't ever talk about it, but it wasn't going to be a main focus of mine.
Well, what you just said there is really one of the ways that I think about political participation, the way I study it. And it focuses, more from a psychology perspective on what are the motivations that we have going into, wanting to be in politics. And some people go in thinking that they're going to get something out of it that they don't get, and then they stop participating in politics, being an activist, door knocking for candidates or fundraising for organizations, not because they don't care about the issues anymore, but because they went into it with a different kind of motive. So, for example, one motive is a social motive. You go into, like, when I moved to Columbus, Ohio, I wanted to desperately, when I was going to grad school, I desperately wanted to meet people who weren't graduate students. And I thought, well, one way to do that would be to volunteer for a political organization. I cared about the issue. I'd always cared about the issue. And I thought, well, this is a great way for me to meet people. And I started volunteering, and I realized I hated everybody who was there. Didn't like the volunteers, didn't want to hang out with them, had no desire. I'd rather hang out with all my, academic friends. And so I stopped participating and stopped volunteering, not because I cared about the issue any less, but because the real motive that got me into it was to meet people and to make new friends and to hang out. And it wasn't meeting that purpose for me. So I stopped. So focusing on motives, and asking, and sometimes very non-political questions about maybe we're going into this for a non-political reason. And that can help explain why sometimes people come in and out of politics over time.
Yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of kind of, well, virtue signaling is this big phrase being tossed around. Once in a while, people will like learn a new sciencey word, and they're like, "All right, that's one I'm gonna I learn one sciencey-ish term a year, and I'm gonna use that one and until whatever expression I was searching for. What's that?
Until the next one comes along.
Yeah. But there is an interesting this kind of way of signaling your commitment to your group.
Yeah.
By this isn't. So this is different than virtue signaling would be kind of this ingenuous, like, I'm a good person because I'm doing this virtuous thing. But what I'm really interested in is ways that you can signal to your group by kind of alienating yourself from the outside group, or like the biker gang wearing like these skulls and stuff on a lot of people are going to give them a lot of odd looks, and that's a pretty heavy cost that they pay socially in the greater and the whole of the world. But boy, are they committed to that. It's a very, you get that tattoo, that's a real true signal of commitment. Religions often come around with like knickknacks you're wearing or hairstyles you have or garb that usually looks a little peculiar to the average person, but does that same thing. Wow, I'm committed. Look at this. And I'm so fascinated by that.
Yeah. And I think that signaling your identity, or signaling that I'm a good group member, whatever the group might be. And in politics, if we're thinking about the US context, it's I'm a good Democrat or I'm a good Republican, typically, right? And that signaling that I'm a good Democrat or I'm a good Republican through participating in politics is, and then by doing it in a way that's public, or that you can make public by going on social media and claiming all of the activities that you do or that you're voting. Is another sort of motive for participating, right? It's an identity motive. Good group members do these things, and I'm a good group member, so I'm going to do those things. What's happening these days is polarization in the US has gotten so crazy, and Democrats hate Republicans and Republicans hate Democrats. These days, participating to show you're a good group member is really focused on screwing over the other group rather than support for your own group, right? What we want to do is demonstrate how much we really hate the other side in our activities, in our social media posts, in how we go after other people on social media, to denigrate that out group or the other side rather than participating in favor of your own group.
Why'd I vote for that person? Because they piss off that other team.
Other side, right? They're not the other. They're not the other one. Right?
Yeah.
Right. Which leads to very perverse politics.
Yeah. Have you know that classic study where they have people come in and they have like the two different colored shirts, like yellow or purple or whatever, and they assign them randomly to people, and people start organizing themselves naturally. All of this group of strangers starts the purple shirts talk to the purple shirts, and the yellow shirts talk to the yellow shirts. Have they ever done anything where they try to take it a step further and assign like other things, like, okay, purple plays kickball and yellow plays wiffle ball, and then have them bicker over which one is the superior sport or anything like that?
Yeah, the old sort of classic studies on this subject, the classic one is the one by Sharif and Sharif, where it was in the context of a boys' camp. And the boys come to the summer camp, and they're basically just split up into two groups. And one live in one bunker or whatever, campsite, and the others live in the other campsite. And they just kind of separate them and just kind of watch what happens. The two groups give themselves, they name that one of them's the Rattlers, the other is I'm not going to remember the other name now. Anyway, another name.
I don't think
The
yellow
Eagles,
and purple were the correct color of shirts either. We don't need to get hung up on
the and the Rattlers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they themselves naturally just sort of form their own identities, and then they start competing with one another in activities where it doesn't actually require them to compete with one another. But you're asking something different, though, and I'm not sure the answer to that. I'm not sure if you actually assign people to these groups and then gave them different activities. Presumably that would kind of ramp this up. Yeah.
That like purple shirt people tend to, view this and that about they tend to, be against gluten or, just pick arbitrary things and see how revved up people get about it.
Yeah, there's one like that where they assign people based on, they show people dots on a screen and ask them to estimate how many dots are on the screen. And then they just tell people, well, you're an overestimator or you're an underestimator. And that's completely random. And just calling people overestimators and underestimators, people in the overestimator group value overestimating. I think, that's, and people in the underestimating group, underestimating is the way to go. And,
I love that.
We are,
I wonder what things I do that
to mess with because these are the way our brains work, right? We want to be in groups, and it doesn't mean anything to be in a group that where there isn't another group that you can distinguish yourself from, right? We do this just naturally. I'm part of this group, and my group is defined by not only the features of my group, but that we don't have those other features.
Let me throw this at you. How would you say that applies to, there's this interesting thing of like anti-conformists are in this like almost separate group of their own, which is weird because I kind of fall into that I've lived a very rebellious life. I've always, you don't become a stand-up comedian usually unless there's something off. And then from there to like abandon kind of a successful path in comedy to then be like, and then I'm going to talk about the evolution of the brain too. And I can't get far enough away from people. I get a sense that I'm starting to get toward a group. I'm like, I'm going to go the other way. I think I'd be very happy being in a cabin in the woods by myself, with some books and notepads. But I've always kind of been against the man and the law and all this stuff. But I'm also 40 now, and I've kind of gained an appreciation for how some of the systems help navigate lives, and why we have traffic that goes on one side of the road that goes this way and the other side of the road that goes that way, and it's through COVID I've had a lot of, I've done a lot of psychedelic research advocacy in my career. From that, I've gotten a lot of people from like the new agey or like fringy communities and stuff, and they just like can't believe that I'm buying into this mainstream science of COVID or whatever, because they've kind of built these heuristics, which is like, hey, you don't trust the government. You don't just trust a pharmaceutical company. You don't just trust what the media is telling you. And these are like really useful heuristics in a lot of circumstances, especially, not especially, but also in like signaling, and you're going and hanging out in your groups and going to like Burning Man parties and whatever else. And like, we aren't like those normies out there, and so what's going on there? What about, I guess what I'm trying to say is like loners having groupthink. kind of.
Well, the loner identity is actually still a group identity.
Yeah.
What you just said is that you use the word we in referring to these people, right? That we don't just trust science. We don't, not I, but we. Now, part of that identity of that we may be, we don't socialize all the time, and we as a group like to be alone as individuals, but I'm still I'm not so completely unique that there aren't other people out there like me. Mm-hmm. There are other people out there like me. And we may want to be in our cabin in the woods all by ourselves with our books and our notepads. But there is still there are other people like me out there, and we don't trust government. We don't trust science. We don't trust pharmaceutical companies. And
I don't want to hang out with other loners.
No,
I just want to know that they're out there.
Exactly, right. You want to go to Burning Man with them every now and then, but then when you want to go to your cabin in the woods all by yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Interesting. All right. Well, let's get into some of your conspiracy research. Can you give me some of that background?
Yeah, sure. So let's see. I don't want to bore your listeners. I can
no, it's that. Please don't worry about that. We have so many exciting things to talk about. I'm not worried.
Well, let me just start with where this started from for me in the first place. Because I started doing conspiracy theory research back in 2012, 2013, pre-QAnon, pre-Donald Trump, pre-all of this that we're experiencing these days. And the way it came about was I saw a poll online. It was a PPP's organization. It's public policy polling. They tend to be a polling organization that they do a lot of kind of fun, kind of BuzzFeedy type surveys, some of them, and they have these clickbaity headlines. And so there was this one about, some percentage of people believe that there are lizard people walking amongst us, right? They're shape-shifting lizard people. And of course I clicked on it because it was clickbait, and I fell for it. And then I thought to myself, well, this is a pretty serious, this is a polling organization. They know what they're doing. They do surveys all the time. And I was wondering, what happens if you agree to do a survey, right? You get a phone call or you click on a link online to do a survey, and you start seeing questions about, do you believe that there are shape-shifting lizard people among us? Does that make you think that maybe the rest of the survey is goofy? And does it make you take the rest of the survey less seriously? When I started this research, I didn't even care about what people thought about shape-shifting lizard people. I was interested in just the appearance of those questions on a survey, how it affects the rest of the survey. So I was talking about this with one of my grad students at the time, and a friend of mine as well. So Kyle Saunders and Christina Farhart. And the three of us, I said, Christina, this is a quick and easy publication for you. We do a simple study. We randomly assign people to get these conspiracy theory questions at the beginning of the survey or the end of the survey. We ask all of these standard political questions in the middle. And then the hypothesis is simple. People who see the conspiracy theory questions on the front end are more likely to be less serious in their answers to the rest of the
Bing,
survey.
bang, boom,
Bing, bang,
easy,
boom,
peasy, famous last words.
Famous last words. No effects at all. And we tortured that data to death. Yeah. No effects at all of where the questions were on the survey, to no effects of that on any of the other political questions on the survey. So I'm thinking, shit.
I've had some of these moments in my life where it's like, damn, so really this many people do believe? No, they can't. I've had too many of those times now where I'm like, no, humans aren't that crazy.
Right. Or I must have coded the data wrong. It's got to be here someplace. And then it's, of course, I had dragged my graduate student into this, and she did the bulk of the work. I told her, first author publication, it's all, it's yours, it's great. And then we get nothing. We try to publish the null findings. And as you know, from talking to other scientists and academics, it's really hard to publish null findings in an academic journal. And so then I'm thinking, well,
this just in, front page news. Scientists find nothing today. That would be an amazing headline, like front page of a paper. That would be such a refreshing reset for people, wouldn't it? Nothing happened yesterday.
Exactly. Years and years and years ago, I want to say in the 40s, there was a journal in psychology called the Journal of Null Findings. It didn't last very long. No one cited the articles in the journal. And so we couldn't publish this thing. And so, but then I started saying, I started looking again at the survey, and we have all these questions. We have questions that assess people's political knowledge. We have questions about trust in government. We have questions about partisanship. And we have these conspiracy theories that we measured on this survey that were, some of them impugned Democrats and some of them impugned Republicans. And so I said to Christina and Kyle, and we sort of were saying, what can we make of this? And so we started looking at the research out there on, very little research out there on why people believe conspiracy theories. And we said, well, we can enter that conversation with these data. And we focused on this notion of what's called motivated reasoning in the context, and this is in the context of politics, but people want to sort of hang on to attitudes that bolster their worldview, protect their worldview, and cling on to the attitudes they have. It's kind of like this notion that attitudes are possessions, right? Mm-hmm. Beliefs are possessions. They're things that we own and we want to hang on to them. So we process information in a way that enables us to hang on to the attitudes that we already have, to make our identities, to bolster our identities, to protect our identities. And so when it comes to conspiracy theories, it's completely natural that Democrats are going to be more likely to believe conspiracy theories that make Republicans look bad, and Republicans are going to be more likely to believe conspiracy theories that make Democrats look bad. That's not, again, that's not a New York Times headline, right? That's not breaking news, right? We would know that. But what we were more interested then is in things that may exacerbate or mitigate that motivated reasoning effect. And so what we find is that political knowledge, people who are more knowledgeable about politics, actually exacerbates that motivated conspiracy endorsement. You might think that it would actually turn it off, but it actually turns it on. When you're more knowledgeable about politics, you're better able to make connections between your identities and your beliefs and say, hey, if I believe this really does bolster my side and make the other side look bad. So knowledge turns it on, political knowledge, and then political trust turns it or mitigates. So when you trust government, even if you really, really, really want to believe that the other side are a bunch of, cheating, nefarious, evil people, if you really trust government, you're not going to be able to talk yourself into that. Mm-hmm. So the sweet spot for these beliefs is high political knowledge, low trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess like as someone who's a skeptic and rather cynical, I guess that for me extends to like not. It's like not that I don't believe in like possibilities of like different Illuminati type things that can and do happen. It's just that I think that like, probably if you're in the Illuminati, there's a lot of people like, at the cubicle in the Illuminati, like on solitaire and stuff on their 9 to 5, I think everyone's just kind of human. Probably if you're in the Illuminati, you're probably also don't like your boss in the Illuminati. And you're like, what are they up to? And and so, and I also don't mean to write off like regular old corruption with like, oh, no one's smart enough to pull off those things, or no one's motivated enough to pull off those things. Corruption's real. It does happen.
Conspiracies are real, and conspiracies do happen.
Right. Absolutely. And it's just that that some of them, it's just some of the things, you know, I just like working through them in my head and picturing. I put a post out on Facebook recently that was like, you know, I go around, I get a pretty random sample size of scientists. As far as I can tell, I can email someone and be like, hey, I'm a stranger in your town and I'd like to talk about your work this week. Can you find some time? And most scientists are more than thrilled to be like, wow, someone wants to hear what I do? Yes. Finally, like even my spouse doesn't want to hear me talk about my work. I found scientists to be more than generous with not just their time but their information. If they're hiding things, which I'm you know, it's not like there's never things where it's like, well, we can't really. There's an awkward situation with the way funding's being done and this and that. It's not like that's never happened in the history of science or anything. But there, I posted this, you know, what I thought was like a very reasonable, thoughtful video that got a pretty reasonable response. I was worried it was going to get a stronger reaction and get more attacked by people. And someone was just like, yeah, but what about stuff like this? And they posted this video that was a congressman a few years ago that was giving a talk about someone else who was like a CDC whistleblower that released a report that they were, so this is like such like detached, like third hand. It was like of a person and I heard this from another person. And the story that they heard was that they were eyewitness to the CDC destroying data on vaccines. And what they'd witnessed was that the scientists in a lab, they brought in a trash can, put in the paper data into the trash can and lit it on fire. And that's how they destroyed this and that evidence of a vaccine. And it's just like, wow. I mean, I guess I'm privileged that I've gotten to like see what labs look like and everything and talk to academics, but like, to imagine that scenario where all data is stored in paper for some reason. This isn't like the 1950s. This is like a few years ago. And then they're all getting together and ceremoniously burning it indoors in a trash can too. You're not worried about the fire alarms going off. Like nothing about this story is making sense. And that story is so much more logical than most of the conspiracies going around out there.
Well, and I think that, and the logical sort of coherence, internal coherence of a conspiracy theory is sort of irrelevant in some sense to or not related at all to the percentage or number of people who actually believe it. And so, which makes it harder to debunk them because you can't debunk them with logic because the logic isn't what brought them there in the first place. We can talk about, that we can talk about debunking potentially later, but the way to think about this.
I'm writing so many notes right now. I can't write fast enough.
So the way to think about this is that conspiracy theory beliefs oftentimes stem from some level of uncertainty, some level of feeling of powerlessness, some level of feeling like you've lost control. Okay,
yes. Okay, good.
Right. So put yourself in the position of a young mother who vaccinates her child as she's told to do and follows the vaccination schedule that trusted science has put forth. Mm-hmm. And then around the time that vaccine occurs is when, and these days it's happening early and earlier, right? That doctors are able to start testing for pre-autism sort of signs, or signs earlier about early signs of autism. And now you've got these two things that coincide. Kid got the vaccine, and
2 months later, you go in for the autism test.
Right.
And what
2
do you
months
know?
later, you go for the autism test, and your doctor tells you that your child is exhibiting signs of potential autism, and these are things that you have to work through. Okay, so now put yourself in this mother's position. Now her world is upended completely, and she's now searching for answers and reasons and explanations. This is what we all do. When we don't understand something, we seek out explanations for it, because if we can figure out an explanation, we can operate better in our world. One explanation is that it's hereditary and she gave her kid autism. That's like the worst explanation for that mother to believe, because then she feels like it's her fault.
Right.
Another explanation is that it's random. That also is not a satisfying explanation, because if it's random, I can't control it. And then she mentions this to a friend, and her friend says, there's a link between autism and vaccines, and pharmaceutical companies and scientists have been hiding this for years. They've been, lighting data on fire for years to hide this. And she goes, aha, that's the answer. And then that answer, because now she's sort of tied this up into a neat explanatory bow, and now needs confirmation of that. So anything, no matter how logically out there it is, I really, really want to believe this thing. And so I'm going to believe all of the twists and turns and illogical nature of the things. And because I now have an answer. Right?
Yeah. And to me, what I think is really, what's the word? I don't want to say dangerous. It's just such the motivated reasoning when it comes to conspiracies is such an unstoppable force from a confirmation bias point of view, because the more incorrect you are about a thing, that's almost more evidence of just how sneaky they are. If it's like, 5G, so you have a similar to your thing. Yeah. 5G towers start going up, and then shortly after this global I don't remember 5G towers being up before, and I don't remember global pandemics happening before, right after one another. You're telling me that's merely a coincidence? And then you find out, like, okay, I guess the 5G thing maybe isn't. And then, so it's even worse than I thought. Is like, they're that good at hiding it that okay, because you can kind of get through and okay, if we're getting microchipped, why is it 2 doses? Why aren't they getting the microchip in on the first dose? Is the second one activated? And oh, you're right, man. They're really hiding it even in it'll only become a more and more sophisticated story. And so the more you're proven wrong, the more powerful this hidden operating system has to be. The more intelligent, the more sneaky they are.
Yeah. And 5G is another good example. The 5G tower is spreading the virus. Again, global pandemic, we're all freaked out. We're all uncertain. We're all feeling the effects of this pandemic in so many ways upending our lives. And we want to find answers. We want to know what's causing the virus, what's spreading the virus. It can't just be random. It can't be this unseen thing that we can't really fight. So 5G towers, great. 5G towers are the answer. I can fight the tower.
And someone did.
Yes, and more than one person did, and that's kind of the point.
Several, right.
That's the either I can physically fight the tower myself, or I can spread the good word that towers are causing or spreading the virus. And that's a way that I can gain agency back in a way that I didn't have before.
Yeah. I mean, so I hope that when I kind of set this up earlier, that people that are, it's not even so much that I'm, it depends on what day you talk to me. I do have days where I'm absolutely enraged, no doubt, no doubt about it. I've had days a certain comment really sets me off, but I do find it absolutely fascinating. Take this for example, if we can kind of ground a big topic like consciousness and motivated reasoning and confirmation bias. One of the most helpful things that I ever heard is in relationships. So the stress response system is you get stressed. This hormonal cascade goes through your system and it delegates energy to this and that to get you out of the system, takes energy away from these long-term building projects and stuff like you don't need that right now. You need to get the heck out of there. And so let's power the legs and not power the sex drive or whatever. We need everything into reflexes right now. And then the threat is gone. And then you have this parasympathetic response that takes place. And this is all kind of, a lot of this is regulated through hormones like cortisol and hormones, unlike your reflexes, which are lightning fast and this, sending a synaptic signal, from your toe to your brain. Hormones exchange can take, say, 20 minutes. And so this parasympathetic response, it can take a while for us to get dialed down after we rage scroll on the internet or whatever else. If you're in a relationship and you get worked up because of the dishes or whatever, a lot of times what will happen is you'll actually resolve the issue at hand. but your body, your hormone is telling you that there's still a threat. It's going to take 20 minutes before this parasympathetic response takes place. And so how do you now there something in your consciousness is going, I'm getting this signal that I'm stressed. I'm getting this signal that there's a threat and it's like directed at this person right now. And I need to find evidence for this. And so you start searching back through time. You start going, oh, this is like the last week when we were entertaining, and you start piling the evidence. Your little lawyers inside start mounting the evidence for this court battle that you're now in with this person, when you could just maybe go for a walk and separate for 20 minutes and revisit things rather than pile on. Life-changing. That's one of the things that I don't always remember it in the moment, but that's great to know. Let
me add on to that. So let's take that example one step further. Instead of taking that walk, what you do in that 20 minutes when you're still ramped up is you call a friend and you say, my spouse did this. Isn't that awful? And your friend says, yes, that's awful. And you say, yes, it's even more awful than I thought it was. Oh, now I need to get a divorce, right? And what you do is you seek out confirmation for your belief, not just internally, not just by pattern matching, saying, oh, this is like that other time, but you go look for social support, which is exactly what happens with conspiracy theories. And that, some people say, well, you're crazy for believing X, and start to isolate you, call you a crazy nut job conspiracy theorist. And then you say, well, there are people over here and they reinforce my beliefs and they tell me I'm super smart for thinking these things. So I'm going to start hanging out with those people some more. And I'm going to spend more time on that subreddit or that 8chan or that 4chan or 12chan, whatever chan we're on now. And that's sort of that spiral that can happen because we're looking for that confirmation. We're looking for that support for these beliefs that we really, really, really want to hold on to.
Yeah.
And so,
of course, that's why that's why your best friends are the ones that tell you what you need to hear, not what not what you want to hear. But boy, is it awkward to do. That's why it doesn't happen that often. But there's now if you take something like it's probably been a hot minute since we've talked about it on the show, but you take something very similar, which is these two major stressors in life, a lack of predictability and lack of control, each one pretty stressful on its own, but you take both of those things away. And now, especially chronically, now you have kind of this learned helplessness. And once you feel this kind of internal helpless feeling and you're looking for confirmation of this, what are those? Consciousness is so impressively good at this, creating the most elaborate. It's incredible. I just got my second vaccine this week, and day 2, fortunately, I'm mindful of all this stuff, and it was like more amusing than anything. But day 2, as my immune system was going through boot camp, it was just I've had much worse hangovers, but it was just this general like meh. Like I went to go and play pickleball, made it through half a game before I was like, no, you're not playing sports today. And even ones that are questionable if we should call it a sport. And then
we could have a whole other podcast on what are sport. What should we call it? What is a sport and what is not a sport?
There was this general, just very just zapped. Very. By the way, following day felt amazing, and today is now 3 days later. Feel great. But there was this general feeling of like I was supposed to record a podcast that day, maybe, and just a general feeling of like, oh, what's the point in anything that I'm doing? And none of this is going to work out anyway, which is a pretty nice, convincing conscious narrative. If you need to convince a big gangly organism to lay down in bed and not waste energy, that's a pretty convincing narrative to get it to not get out of bed. And it's hard to not attach to those stories and seek more evidence for them, because I've gone down that wormhole many times. And so the point is if you're feeling this, if you're experiencing this learned helplessness, which so many people are many points in their lives, the conscious narrative that's going to perpetuate that is, well, the world is full of shocks and random chaos and everything else too, or it's just like plotting against me. And so what's the point in doing anything anyway?
Right. And you mentioned learned helplessness, and there is a scale that psychologists are developing. There's a scale for everything, but there is a learned helplessness scale, and we've used it in our research, and we found that learned helplessness is positively related and causally related, because we can do this. We've done this in a panel survey where time 1 learned helplessness predicts time 2 conspiracy theory beliefs. Now it's a vicious cycle, because conspiracy theory beliefs also cause learned helplessness.
Right.
And if you believe the world is run by secret plots that we'll never understand, then that's certainly not going to make you feel efficacious. It's certainly going to feed into learned helplessness. So there's this vicious cycle, learned helplessness to conspiracy theories, to learned helplessness to conspiracy theories, and so forth, in this sort of death spiral.
Right. Yeah, that it is. It's like that thing plotting against you is your own conscious narratives, unfortunately. And it's hard to convince people of that. I mean, first off, I've been there. I've told myself all sorts of stories of like why I shouldn't put any effort into life or believe in anything or this and that. And some of them are kind of realistic too. I mean, that's another conversation for another day.
Because your brain is so agile and you've made yourself, you've convinced yourself.
Yeah. But there's, I've had two good friends that are just a hyper salient example of exactly one was, so all this started, both happened around like 9/11. It was there's this big dramatic, what's going to happen next? We're all scared. You never saw this coming. I'd never even considered such a thing as a possibility. Not just an attack, but such an attack in a peculiar way. And so, which really gave rise to like InfoWars as this Alex Jones starts, and especially, so being a comedian or a divergent thinker, there's a lot of people that are like, oh, this like exciting kind of fringe narrative. I hear this to, well, I don't want to get too off course, but one thing that I hear a lot when people are trying to, when they send me some like COVID denier or whatever, that's like an intelligent, it's usually like an engineer or something that's like verbally fluent that doesn't know virology, that's like written some like well worded thing. And they'll be like, well, science throughout history, all of these major scientific advances were thought crazy, and at the fringe, I'm like, no, you're misunderstanding what happened there. What happened was that a physicist that was really good at what they do and well trained in physics and mathematics and stuff made a discovery that was like a little bit outside of the norm, and like physicists like bickered over like this new model or this old model that was like, to an outsider, you would be indistinguishable. And then there was like this once in a generation kind of shift in this one field that didn't abandon the old model, still worked within what it was modeling. And that is very different. What hasn't happened in history was like, well, there's this guy that was searching for Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster and ancient aliens and had signals for other aliens and every other thing under the sun, and they figured out all of them. It turns out they were right all along. That's never happened. I'm going on a whole tirade right now. I feel like I should take a break. So, but anyway, the let me just finish the personal story, which is that both these friends, the same things happened. They got into the InfoWars stuff. They got into the fringe thinking of stuff. It was all like fun and games in the beginning. And then something happened. One of them got MS and then really spiraled into the like, oh, I was drinking a lot of Diet Coke at the time. And then that was, and then you look into it, and what do you know? It has to do with like Jews covering up this and that, and it ended up becoming like some white supremacist sort of thing, and having to do something or other with Christianity. Lizard people are involved. Okay, well that got crazy in a hurry, and then same thing happened. My other friend, same thing. The one like hippie guy that I know who's like, thinks a lot like I do and is artsy and everything. His mom gets cancer. He goes through a hard time with it. She had it was a really hard, devastating loss for him. Same thing. Deep into the conspiracy world at that time, ends up becoming like super racist and everything else, which is like so out of character for the old person that I knew. And again, is just like learned helplessness, just running amok.
And Yeah. Well, and there's also another piece of this around the whole learned helplessness, feeling like you've lost control, bad things have happened to you, your family, or in the world. One is seeking out an explanation for that thing. But the other thing is that if we lose control in one aspect of our lives, we sometimes try to overly gain control in another aspect of our lives to compensate for the fact that we've lost control someplace else. One way to gain control is to connect dots that other people haven't connected. Right. And again, because our brains are so good at this kind of thing, we can connect lots of dots. We can see two things that just are related or happen at the same time, and we can build all sorts of stories around why those two things are related. And that is, again, a powerful look at how smart I am, or look at how in the know I am. And now I am among my group of friends. They look to me because I'm able to connect these dots and figure these things out. And now I can share this with everybody else. And now I can't cure my mother's cancer, right? But I can teach my friends about the Illuminati, or about this or that or the other thing, about aliens living among us. And I can be the conduit, in a sense, of all of this vast amount of information. I can distill it down into A causes B causes C in a really simple story. And I put my energy there because I can't do the thing that I really want to do, which is cure my mother's cancer.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's also a thing where it's like, it's like everyone's always, like, most conspiracy theorists, when you talk to, they're usually you know, if you're not like specifically their main outgroup target, which unless it's like race related, no one's like in their outgroup that actually exists. So you meet and they're always super nice, like always have like a really big heart and everything else. And so there's always this has happened, you know, my whole life with, I was raised super religious and everything. It's like, well, they're so nice and they like mean well and everything else. And so that's a good person. Don't you want to, a good person can't be wrong about a thing.
Right.
I'll tell you that. So I'm bipolar, and so I have once in a while I'll have an extreme manic episode. So I get to I get to once in a while I get to take a vacation and crazy, and so I like, I get it. I get what people are seeing in those states, and it's so powerful. I consider myself a bit of a connoisseur of like emotional drivers, and I have like a deep appreciation for most of them, other than paranoia is the one that I just can't wrap my head around much of the utility of, because it's so dilute. Because what'll happen is, when you're in a really paranoid state like that, like 99% of me knows logically this is not, actually more, 99.999% of me knows logically this is not the case. This is not, this paranoid idea is not, but it's so salient that, and it's like, but if it is, the cost involved are so tremendous that it's not, you can't risk that not considering that.
Yes. And that's right. That I'd rather believe this than not believe it. Right. For that reason, right? Because the consequences, I'd rather have my guard up. I'd rather not drive by a 5G tower during a global pandemic, because, you know, maybe the chances that the 5G tower is spreading the virus are slim, but if it's the case, and again, we're trying to figure out how and how to operate in the current context that we're living in. And when we're in those hyper threatened, anxious states, that teeny percentage is enough to potentially change our behavior, right? To avoid the tiny chance that something really bad will happen. Right.
Yeah.
You said something that made me want to, and now I lost it. One thing, and it's just sort of my, not exactly pet peeve, but I try to stay away from the phrase conspiracy theorist. And the reason I do that is because what the research kind of shows is that it's not, conspiracy theorist sort of denotes like a type of person. And there are people who are conspiracy theorists, and there are people who are not conspiracy theorists. And it kind of denotes this sort of stable characteristic of the person. And what we see is that that's not the case, that pretty much, everyone has dabbled in or believed a conspiracy theory at one point in their lives, and situations can change. And so that sometimes people will believe and sometimes they won't believe. People on the losing side of politics are more likely to believe conspiracy theories than on the winning side of politics. And so winners become losers and losers become conspiracy theorists. And then they become winners and they're no longer conspiracy theorists. And so I try to stay away from that phrase for that reason, that there are a lot of situational determinants of these beliefs. There are certainly personality characteristics as well, but that it's not just these, group A and group B.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to lump them in. I'll tend to say the conspiritual or the scary tale peddlers or something if I'm having a bad day. But that's
sure.
There's definitely religiosity attached to it. It is the tendency that I seem to have noted, and that's the kind of new age and wellness community is sort of ripe with this during COVID, because there's this, the manifestors, if you have this point of view, which has tons of utility in many situations, like you said, everything's kind of situational, so much utility to creating a vision board. And I mean, Michael Phelps mentally rehearsed swimming every night before bed, and there's tons of utility in that, but where it kind of like goes a little off is when you start literally believing that you're manifesting every aspect of your reality, and then you kind of get confronted with, oh well, but why isn't reality bending to my will? And then there's some cognitive dissonance that kind of starts firing off there.
Yeah. And you mentioned religiosity, and there certainly is a correlation between religiosity and conspiracy theory beliefs. And probably the thing that holds those two types of beliefs together is a willingness to believe things that we can't see in some respects, right? That, or even take that one step further, a willingness to believe that things that we can't see, powerful people or beings or entities that we can't see, are having some sort of control over the tangible, right? The things that we can see. And so this aspect of sort of being able to suspend disbelief, being able to sort of take that step back and say, just because I can't see it doesn't mean that it's not true. And just because I can't give you tangible evidence for it doesn't mean that it's not true. So I have this kind of, and that's where you sort of new age thinking, can be related to conspiracy theory beliefs. Religiosity can be related to conspiracy theory beliefs. The belief in sort of the mystical or the is also related in some ways. I sort of have this idea, and I haven't actually done this study, and I should just stick a couple of these questions on one of my surveys one of these days. People, and it's I'll just throw this hypothesis out there that people who are really into science fiction or really into fantasy may very well be more likely to believe conspiracy theories. And again, because it's about the suspension of disbelief, this being willing to sort of, like, I can't get into fantasy, I can't get into science fiction, and I can't get into it because I'll watch it and I'll say, but that can't happen, right? And my brain can't, I can't lose myself in it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. You should check out Alien Worlds on Netflix.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
Because it's super grounded. Okay. And it's more science speculation rather than science fiction. So it's like a way of, I'd be curious what you think of. So they have like an evolutionary biologist being like, hey, look, this insect has wacky eyes, and here's why sexual selection shaped that. Here's if gravity works slightly differently on this planet, this is maybe what a thing. And then there's fun CGI and stuff.
Cool.
But anyway, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's fine.
You'll thank me when you watch it.
Yes. And so I think that again, all of this is about what your brain, what you can tolerate as an acceptable explanation for something. And we're all searching for explanations, and we want to find explanations that are satisfying to us because they serve the purpose that we need them to serve. And so people have different tolerances for types of evidence, tangible, being able to physically see the cause and the effect, versus ones who are willing to take things on faith a little bit more. And so I think that there's, again, a level there. And then, of course, keep in mind that when you really want to find an explanation, all that goes out the window because you really, really, really want to find an answer, and you'll throw all of the lot right, to find an answer to get one that you think then ultimately will satisfy your whatever uncertainty, anxiety, whatever's going on. The sad thing is that it usually doesn't. It usually makes us more anxious. But we think it's going to help.
And then you need it more because
exactly.
Yeah, and a bit of a cycle. There's also something going on with, I don't know why my voice went up there. There's also but because I want to talk about over-perceiving agency because it was related to what you were just saying, but there's also something with a fondness for, it's probably attached to some high openness stuff of like a comfort with ambiguity, being comfortable with ambiguity, but also really high in like I'm very high in openness, but I'm low in agreeableness.
Okay.
And so it seems like high in openness plus high in agreeableness is like new agey sort of thing. And so now you're talking about like way into like sacred geometry is and I'm just like, well, what do you mean sacred? Like you can't question it? What are we talking about? Are we talking about like the sum of the angles of a triangle is 180 degrees? Because I'm on board if that's what we're talking about here. But it's never that. It's like, no, I just think it's all magic. And so I'm like, oh, but the Fibonacci is in all these different plants. Well, because a leaf that's 30 degrees to the side of a leaf above it gets more than stays out of the shade. Is that what you're? Yes, it would be more peculiar if plants didn't stumble on this trick over and over again through a billion years of evolution. Is that what we're talking about here? No, it's like this magic kind of, and there's this, it's almost like this in terms of the group dynamic, it's almost like this fighting over territory of like of the known and the unknown, or the cognitive. Science is like, here's what here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's what we're exploring, and no comment on the rest of it. Whereas a lot of people are like, okay, all that no comment stuff, that's mine. That's where I'm planting my flag. That's my territory.
Sure. Yeah. And this magical thinking aspect is really fascinating. So there's this, and I'm looking over to the side because I have the book over here and I'm blanking on it. I'll follow up with you later because I do want to give you the citation to this book. But
sure.
There's a relationship between things like magical thinking, again, and conspiracy theory beliefs. So these scholars develop this scale. And it's kind of like a magical or symbolic thinking type of a scale. And so it's a series. There are only 4, maybe, or 6 questions. And it's a pair of things. Would you rather do A or B? Right. And there are things like this. Would you rather eat a plate of cockroaches or take a knife and stab a picture of your family? Okay. Would you rather, do something physically unpleasant, like stand in line at the DMV for 5 hours, or scream at the top of your lungs, I wish my family were dead. And so and I'm not pitting the right ones against one another, but the basic idea is there are things that are obviously tangible, unpleasant things.
Right. And then there's things where I'm just like, well, do I have to mean it? Or can I just stab the picture and this would be a fun craft project?
Well, the idea here is that there are people who will be much more likely to eat all the nasty stuff.
Yeah.
Than or jump on somebody's grave or sleep in a house that there was a murder in, right? And so take all these symbolic things. And now me, I took this scale myself. I gave it to my husband and we're both, we're stabbing the family. I'm not eating those cockroaches. I'm not stabbing my family, stabbing the picture of my family.
Yeah.
The symbolic stuff doesn't bother me at all.
No, me either.
Right. But for some people who are higher on that sort of either magical thinking, like if I step on that crack, it really will break my mother's back, maybe superstitious beliefs that are more likely, again, to see patterns and to be willing to accept these, conspiratorial connections and links that others of us would say there's no logical connection there. And so that kind of magical thinking, symbolic thinking is also related to conspiracy thinking.
Yeah. That is interesting. That's always there is like a conscientiousness, like a cleansing kind of there's the interesting moral stuff of like letting people wash their hands after they've kind of done something wrong, and it kind of cleanses their you have them cheat on a test or prime them to cheat on a test or something, they can wash their hands afterwards, and then they'll cheat on the test again or whatever, rather, but they won't if they don't get a chance to wash their hands because they'll be riddled with guilt. There is something with because there's a lot of but by the way, this isn't an attack on like the wellness community, although holy smokes, when it comes to global pandemics, there's a whole lot of snake oil that's been fired up through history. And there's and diet fads and everything else are nothing new, but there's a lot of interesting words associated. There's a lot of cleanses. There's a lot of clean eating and stuff like that. There's just a lot of these ideas of clean living, it's like this, almost like an OCD of ideas or something like that, or of the abstract.
And to me that also comes back to control. If I'm going to control every aspect of what I eat, be very conscious of what I put in my body, and wanting to eat all natural, because that gives me some control, presumably, over my health. Right? I'm going to be able to actively stay healthy for longer, not get cancer, because of the active things that I'm doing, that may or may not be based in scientific anything.
Yeah. And especially right? Emboldened by things that are absolutely eating healthier food is the absolute way to go if you can do it. And then it's when it goes from like that to this, then it kind of starts blending into things where it's just, it just gets hijacked. Then anything with the word organic on it must mean it's good for you. Anything that says cage free on it, that must mean that like these animals are just like having little like skipping around in the fields or something like that. And but going back to this, so what do you think about how much of this is, well, a mismatch with our modern world? And I guess because there's a few things. I don't know which direction. I have two equally interesting things that I would love to hear your take on. Hopefully we can get to both of them. One is the ability to assign agency, this theory of mind stuff that humans were able to predict if you're running this way at a buffalo or something, that it's going to move in this direction because the buffalo is going to understand that you're there and you have intention. And then you knowing that the buffalo knows that you have intention allows you to, and then you can make eye contact with someone else across the field. And this is like this incredibly complicated thing that social animals are able to pull off, and these pack hunters are able to pull off. And it's so beneficial, and to know that something might be out to get you, to know that something could jump out of the brush at any time, and there's a rustling in the brush, and that might happen. It's there was a cost to not to sometimes missing when something did have agency.
Absolutely. There's a sense that in kind of the work that I do in studying why people believe conspiracy theories, whenever I talk about this, I want to be clear that I don't want to give the impression that what I'm saying is we need to study these people because we need to fix them. There's some pathology here that needs to be fixed. Because certainly in a democracy, if we want to get all political for a second, we want people to question government. And so we might actually turn this question on its head, right? And instead of asking, why are there people who sometimes don't trust government or ask, is that really is the government explanation for that event? Is that really the explanation, or is there something else going on here? Are those the people we should be studying? Maybe the people we should be studying are ones who say, I believe everything any authority ever says to me, right? I trust everything.
Yeah.
Right? And there are philosophers
that would be a hilarious T-shirt. Just I trust everything.
I mean, think about those two T-shirts. Think about two people. One who's wearing an "I trust everything" T-shirt, and one who's wearing an "I trust nothing" T-shirt.
I'm hanging out with the I trust nothing person 100% of the time, without a doubt.
I think I would be too. Right?
Unless the I trust everything person is wearing it ironically, which I would, and then that person's hilarious.
Of course,
but that's a different dimension.
Of course, right. But but that's the thing here, right? Is that if we're going to accept in a democracy, we want the marketplace of ideas. We don't want censorship. We want people to question their government because we want government accountability. Then we're going to have to accept as a community some level of conspiracy theorizing. It's part of it. And because our brains are hardwired to pattern match, because our brains are hardwired to see agency when agency doesn't exist, we will sometimes connect dots and say this person caused this thing to happen through this plot or this A, B, C, and D that doesn't exist. And so what do we do about that? Do we say, okay, we're going to wipe the internet clean of all sorts of information that may lead someone down a conspiracy path? That's pretty frightening to me to think about that kind of a
the censorship issues,
and it wouldn't fix it anyway. Which is because our brains are still going to try to seek out explanations. We won't be able to go to the internet for it. We'll go to our friends. We'll go outside and look at the world, and we'll figure it out in other ways, and we'll come up with answers. And some of them will be conspiracy answers.
Yeah, and that will only push you to just like only trust your insular group and your neighbors. I mean, it's just we are now this kind of asking your buddies for advice on everything in life probably was your best option through most of human history. And now we're in a situation where, well, if you want to know how a jet engine works, you don't go asking your neighbor unless one of your neighbors builds jet engines.
Exactly.
And that's the only reason why you would ask that person about why jet engines work. And we are just in a vastly more complicated world that is built on the scaffolding of all of these technologies. We're communicating because there's wires going across things and satellites and sky, and it's not everyone needs to be aware that the earth is round 24/7 and right. It's not going to be that big of a deal if there's a few flat earthers out there, but people controlling satellites better darn well know that the earth is round and
exactly.
have a sense of how that operates. And then so we then do need to have some trust and expertise and then there's first of all, I'm just looking at the clock. How much longer do I have you for? Just because I'm just loving this conversation so much, but I want to be respectful of your time.
I would say probably about another 10 minutes or so. I mean,
okay, cool.
Yeah. At least 10 more minutes, 10, 15 in there. Yeah.
Well, because there's an interesting thing of like, rather than, okay, COVID happened. I think when I go out, I talk to virologists and I go outside and I'm like, oh, well, that's even that 6 feet thing isn't like quite enough. They should, I'm not going to say anything, but like I go outside and I'm like, oh, I haven't seen anyone doing it right. Like whether they're meaning to or not. I'm like, oh, no, that's the incorrect. Oh, you're doing all that backwards. But not that people aren't like meaning well and everything else. But one of the things that you see a lot of is the hypersensitivity to hypocrisy, where if things don't make exact, how come how come this fast food place operates in this regard, and then I can go in, I gotta wear a mask to go in the restaurant, and then I can take it off. None of that makes any sense. Why are we wearing a mask in the first place? It's like, no, because that doesn't make sense doesn't mean masks don't work. it means going indoors in a restaurant is a bad idea. And people are just like skirting around like various laws and stuff, which are trying to capture objective reality and then communicate it to masses in this complicated thing that like we can't all learn how a jet engine works. Right. But there's this like abandonment of like, oh, caught a thing, found a thing that doesn't make sense. All right, now I don't have to listen to any of it.
And the people who are doing that are the ones who don't want to wear the mask. Again, it's our brains doing what our brains do, which is finding, seeking out a way to be able to reject the thing that we want to reject.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the other aspect of this, I think that's important to keep in mind, with the pandemic, but with any really science thing, the pandemic has just ramped this up, is that at the beginning of this pandemic, scientists didn't know what COVID was either, and how it was spread, right, and how to best. And so we saw at the beginning, of the first 3-4 months, scientists saying one thing, and then so don't wear masks, disinfect everything in your house, put yourself in a containment, spray yourself down. And what happened was, we don't typically have these fast moving scientific sort of events, in a sense, that we were all watching the scientific sausage being made. And nobody wants to watch the scientific sausage being made. And science isn't that clean. I mean, science is messy.
Yeah.
And the fact that scientists started with we don't need masks, and then turn around and said we do need masks, is because science evolved.
And even if you look through those papers, there was like a lot of back and forth of like, well, if we tell people to wear masks, are they going to disregard the distancing? It was like a lot of those kind of considerations being made that are much more nuanced and complicated than like, they were saying masks are worthless, and now they're saying we all need to wear these muzzles. Like, it was never
right. And so, and again, if that's another way to point to hypocrisy. Well, they said we shouldn't wear them, and and Bill Gates says I should wear a mask. So Bill Gates has got some sort of tracking device in the masks, and it's all Bill Gates's fault, or not fault, but it's Bill Gates is controlling us in some way now through masks.
Putting the one face on something too is a nice little epiphany, kind of over perceiving patterns, simplifying
agency, right?
Last little thing I'll share with you, just because I think you're gonna enjoy this, and maybe you'll have a thing to break down, and we'll wrap up. So I like evolutionary mismatch stuff a lot. I do think a lot of this is modern problems, but this is also, superstition has been all through human history. I had an episode, I don't know if it was like November or something. Anyway, I had great Zach Garfield and Manveer Sai, I think is his last name, talking about, so they're both anthropologists. One of them studies like witchcraft and stuff, and kind of how like hunter-gatherer tribes practice medicine and also settle like kind of legal disputes through the same sort of, it's the same sort, it's just like early versions of like doctors or judges, but just a lot more like sorcery dress, which if you think it's silly, judges still wear weird gown things for who knows what reasons other than historical leftovers. But anyway, there's this tribe, and it's just it's kind of predictable in a lot of ways if you know a lot of the things that we've already discussed. So you'll get a kick out of it. There's this tribe, they have this, what happens is they'll sometimes get a waterborne virus. And so the witch doctor, whatever is called, and to their home, and And so then the diagnosis is that so they don't know, germ theory. They don't and the diagnosis is that that there's like this like ghost alligator that gets in through the faucet at night and bites them, and that's how. And so this is one aspect of it. Is what's interesting is they're making like the subconscious, they're picking up on there's a connection to the water. It's close, it's just missing the mark. And then consciousness is kind of exaggerating and embellishing a story, which is a smart thing to do if you want to make something salient and remembered and pay attention to it. And then the doctor will give like, practical advice of resting and whatnot, and maybe some concoctions. Maybe some of them work, some of them don't, or whatever. I'm sure some of them are useful. But then there's a thing of like, it was that alligator had agency, and the reason why that happened to them was because they were doing something wrong, something that they deserved. What were they doing wrong? A social thing, of course, which was that they must not have been being generous enough. And is pretty much the same diagnosis every time. You must have been being too greedy. The water alligator came in and bit you in your sleep. That's what the water alligator does with the greedy ones. And so the remedy is be more generous, be more caring and altruistic, and that's your kind of penance for this, and that's how you gain control over this situation. And
that's how a society advances its values too, and the whole generosity component of that. It's not just you didn't do the right thing, but you didn't do this particular right thing that our community values, and we want everyone to be generous. So we're going to blame it on you not being generous by this unseeing thing, this waterborne illness, and tell you that this is how you got it, and this is the cure to be generous, instead of maybe, I don't know, blocking up the spout that the alligator came through.
Yeah, we should get that alligator. Is no one trying to find this alligator and kill it?
I want to be careful here too, right? Because I'm not making fun of the belief, right? I mean,
I'm saying if you think that's crazy, that is the exact same thing, 5G and everything. I'm sure I have a zillion beliefs of my own that are not that different from the ghost alligator.
We all have superstitions.
Yeah.
We all, you play sports. We all have those superstitions about wearing this particular, never washing socks during the season.
Yeah.
Or rooting for your team. And my team wins every time I wear this particular sweatshirt. And so I'm going to wear that sweatshirt. You know damn well that wearing that sweatshirt is not going to have any impact on whether your team wins or not, but you do it anyway, because what if it does?
Yeah.
What if somehow I do have control and I really want and so it doesn't serve me, and it doesn't bother me to wear the sweatshirt, but if I don't and they lose, it could have been my fault.
Plus, if you're a kid in Little League and your mom's ragging on you to do your laundry, like, oh no, don't, that's I can't clean up my room. This is lucky. You got a big game going.
Exactly.
Well, this has been absolutely wonderful. You'll have to either come back on or point me in the direction of someone to do a whole kind of debunking sort of episode, not just of like let's go after these conspiritual folks, but just generally, the disinformation that we all are confronted with in all of our lives in the information age.
Yes.
This has been absolutely. Was there anything that you wanted to put a bow on before? Was there any loose ends out there or anything that you wanted to make sure and mention, or sites that you want people to check out, or anything like that? Book recommendations?
Yeah. Why don't I send those to you, and then you can because I'm
Sure.
blanking on it right now.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I'll send you a couple of things on that
we'll
front.
add it in the description.
Yeah. We didn't talk about QAnon at all today, but everything about QAnon fits and everything that we've been talking about here. We can actually come back at some point.
If you want to come back on, I definitely have another 90 minutes, no problem, of stuff that I would love to chat with you about. So we can discuss afterwards, but sure. If you want to do a part 2, I would love to do that anytime you're ready.
Great.
Awesome. Well, this is great. Well, thank you, Joanne Miller, for joining me. And thank you, listeners, for being such wonderful, curious people. We'll see you next week. Hey, thanks for watching, everybody. Next week on the show, talked with these chaps, lovely, lovely guests, super fun, funny, just all the we talk a lot about marketing and behavioral economics. Those are always like really, really popular conversations on the show. They're always I'm glad you guys kind of have the same response to the subject as I do. Sometimes people are surprised by it being more filled with like interesting insights than they imagined going into it. Like the episode where I had where we talked about the lost wallet study, for example, stuff like that. I'll get comments from people that they were kind of blown away and not expecting to learn so much from the subject matter. This is going to be one of those kind of episodes. Already recorded it. It was awesome. I didn't read the whole book ahead of time because I'm reading this book called Shape right now, The Hidden Geometry of Information, Biology, Strategy, Democracy, and Everything Else to brush up on. And I haven't read a math or physics book in like a decade, and so I need to brush up on that more for that guest. Then this stuff was already kind of in my wheelhouse, but super, super readable and fun. Blind Sight, The Mostly Hidden Ways Marketing Reshapes Our Brains. I haven't read much in COVID, guys. I have to tell you, like papers and stuff and like articles and things, but not like physical books. I feel like I haven't even had I barely had time to get through like a whole book in all of COVID because I've had a million new projects and reorienting my career and everything else. I want to say Mind Under Matter. If you haven't checked it out, my new podcast with Ramin Nazer, going so well. We're getting so much amazing feedback and trying to expand and do more. So I'm now, because we have a Patreon only podcast on there, and then I'm working on doing a Patreon only podcast for Here We Are as well. So I'm trying to figure out how to pull off 4 podcasts a week, and while figuring out all sorts of, you wouldn't believe the dumb issues of like podcast hosting. How do you get a different podcast art image on an app? Since I'm working with Ramin, we have a different cool piece of art for every single episode. How do you do that? This hosting platform says it does it. We try to do it. It doesn't work. Just constant little things like that is what has been occupying my life for especially 2021, but last year as well, instead of what should be occupying my life, which is reading more books to get ready for my guests. But my guests next week are really, really, really awesome. So make sure and check that one out. It's killer. I hope you enjoyed. I hope when I said at the beginning of this that this is a really good episode, I hope you're in agreement with me. I thought this episode was truly fantastic, and I do want to do more stuff with conspiracy research. We didn't even get to Joanne's papers. You should go to her profile and go in the description and of this episode and check out some more of the links and stuff that we are providing to more of her things. And like, for example, she wrote a paper on gender differences in conspiracy thinking. Ooh, I want to have her back on to talk about that. So hopefully she'll find time, but otherwise I'll get some more guests on the subject. Want to give a big shout out to, I just went through my Patreon, and I was just kind of looking through long term, some of the longest contributors. I just wanted to give some shout outs just to people that have been around for a while and have over time given a fair amount of support to the show, which, by the way, it's an ad-free show. None of this is possible. I have a full-time editor now. My assistant's been helping out again, and so it's a whole. You're supporting a whole family. But Waldo on Patreon is trying. So I had, I did a whole long thing about boat carpet for Mark Ryan, and people didn't even. It was funny. It was in the episode about comedy research. I think, was it that one? I think it was, because we talked about when you do a thing that's a whole elaborate thing based on a real thing, and then people don't believe you, and you're like, "Were you making that up?" No, I wasn't making up that. You could go to the boatcarpetoutlet.com website or whatever, check it out for yourself. Just because it was a hilarious 25-minute rant about boat carpet doesn't mean I made up the concept of boat carpet. So anyhow, I asked Waldo, I was like, "Hey, do you want anything to plug? Do you have business or anything like that?" And listen to this sweetheart, this generous man who has been a longtime supporter. He goes, he goes, "I don't have anything to plug personally, but it would be mind-blowingly fantastic if you could plug my best friend's latest music release." How nice is that? It's called The Instrumental Stylings of 𝕊𝕙𝕒𝕟𝕒. And by the way, I checked it out. It's awesome. I took a look at the Spotify cover and loved it, by the way. And then it's on Laguna Bay Records out of San Francisco. Digital can be found on Amazon. And I really enjoyed the music. I didn't hear all of it. I never listen to music. Don't read books. Spending less time in the car. Don't listen to my audiobooks. Don't listen to music. I listen to music like once a month in COVID, apparently. And so anyway, it's called The Instrumental Stylings of 𝕊𝕙𝕒𝕟𝕒, 𝕊𝕙𝕒𝕟𝕒. And he's describing it as, and I'd say this is accurate from what I heard, it's surf rock, like experimental ventures with Japanese flavor. And so check that out. He said he currently plays for the Sunnyside 5 out of San Fran as well. So thanks, Waldo, for one, being an awesome contributor, and then being a good friend, and plugging your friend's music. That's super cool of you. Love people that support art. Thank you guys for your generous support, and it's been really nice catching up with people on board game nights on Patreon and such. And please make sure and check out Mind Under Matter. It's my favorite new thing. It's so much fun, and it's such a it's just perfect. It's perfect. I love it. And so hopefully it's not just because it's new and exciting. I actually think I get more excited about it all the time. We're getting better and better. If you look at the last episode, we now have all the new studio setup, which we've even tweaked since that time, but we continue to get the video and audio better, and we're adding more highlights on social media, especially Instagram. I like Instagram, Shane, the most, by the way, and Ramin's really big on Instagram. So all you Instagrammers, make sure and follow Ramin and I, and Here We Are Pod, HWA Pod, and Mind Under Pod on Instagram. Facebook and Twitter, I'm on there as well, and I make the posts on there as well. I don't get excited about either. I tend to like vent on Twitter, which, by the way, it's funny. Like I'll like post something on Facebook, and Facebook is just, holy cow. It is. There's some people on Facebook that, wow. And then I'll like vent about them on Twitter, and I'm sure people on Twitter are like, who are you yelling at and making these like straw man arguments or whatever, because I'm venting about Facebook followers on Twitter. Oh my gosh, guys, I shouldn't. Social media, I go back and forth, but I actually like Instagram. I hope it doesn't make me whatever if I'm lame because I like Instagram. What do I care? I'm new to it. I enjoy it. I don't have an abusive relationship with it. I feel like I have a very healthy relationship. I find it amusing. I don't get myself worked up. I don't rage scroll on it. It's cool for posting highlights. I'll sometimes just take a dumb beard picture or something like that. I like Instagram. I like it. So yeah, and I love my Patreon and Discord as well. So yeah, do all those things. And those of you that listen all the way to the end, you are, of course, my favorites.